Hi, and welcome to an edition of the Field Report for this Wednesday, May 15th, 2013. We're going to have a segment called The Backstory, and I particularly like this segment because we really kind of get past the headline topics and dig a little deeper behind the psychological warfare that's going on, because as you can see, media is a great tool for psychological warfare. It can induce fear, threat. It can also incriminate people without even really doing a whole lot other than ruining people's reputations, etc. So the backstory really is how there has been a hideous malice that has come from progressives. Hideous, and I mean hideous because it is ugly. When they target their victim, it could be, in this case, it's a Tea Party now. It's dangerous to see what they're doing. So the backstory is really this hideous idea of what they call politics. I realize that political discussions are political, and that's what it is. But what do they mean when they say getting political? I think that's overstated, okay? And the reason I say that is because some of these words that they use are redundant. When we say politicizing something, again, it almost reverberates. What does politicizing really mean? Does it mean that that because of where you lean on your politics, that you're just going to stay there and you're going to go with it? No, these are real important issues that are not just political, but they're invaluable issues that are really hurting people's lives. So to just kind of call it politicizing, I just think it's, words have important meaning. Words mean something. And when they just kind of just like term it as politicizing, and I'm saying they being liberal progressives, it's almost like you kind of glaze over the real important part of it. That's why the backstory is going to dig a little beyond the headlines, behind the conversations, behind the audios and videos and the media interviews, all that. We're going to get the backstory. So I'm searching out all this good audio and video. There's a lot of news lately. You have not realized there's 3 major scandals going on all at once, and the backstory is, and this is hard to kind of keep up with all that news, and then you don't want to miss the important stuff that's going on behind the scenes, or like the backstory. Now, and the reason I say that is because it'll be interesting to say this, but President Obama had spoke about some things regarding the talking points yesterday. See, the backstory is that while he can water it down and minimize talking points, they were in fact changed. And if there was any rules that were broken, they were doing all that. I mean, they were rewriting the script basically. But that's not important to President Obama, because see, it just kind of just gets whitewashed and all this the whole time. And I say this, I try to say this delicately, the whole time. As Benghazi was, as 9/11/12 happened, the day of 9/11/12, and the story unfolded. Now, be as it may, but it was never their priority to take care of anything going on in Libya from day one. So, to expect them to care about the issues around Benghazi, the actual attack, well, they showed a pattern of behavior, obviously. I mean, Benghazi was not an important issue for Hillary, much less President Obama. I'm not saying that they don't care, because they certainly don't care. I get that. Okay, what I'm saying is they have shown that the security was weak for months prior to the attack. And even afterwards, the only priority for the Obama administration, including Hillary and the State Department, was to make sure that the Muslim world would not be offended. See, the tactics used in all that just shows that all along, Libya was not on their radar. It was not a priority, and it wasn't prior to the attack, during the attack, and after the attack. So for them to argue about talking points, it just goes along with the whole thing altogether. Benghazi was not important before, when all those cables were released over to the State Department. It wasn't important during the attack, and it wasn't important afterwards. And it's still not important. So Benghazi wasn't important to them, but it sure is important to most of the Americans that are following this, who have a real point here to make. And there's some, see, according to the way you see things on the news, when the news day is over, there are parents still waking up with no answers the next day. That lingering, and I'm not saying lack of peace of mind, because I think people would rest a lot better if they had answers, and I think that's what this is really about, getting the right answers. Not the answers that they think that we want to hear, the real truth, because the sincerity on their part really lacks. And that's where a lot of people say, if they were genuinely sincere, I think people would pick up on that. And I think that's the sense that everybody has, is there's been no sincerity in any of the words they've been using, and their actions prove it. So Benghazi will continue to have a lot of questions. As long as those questions aren't answered, it'll continue to be an issue. It doesn't matter if it's 8 months or 8 years. I hate to say that, but if anybody's ever lost a child in the way that Mrs. Smith did, Tyrone Wood's parents, and including Ambassador Stevens' family, and including Glenn Doherty. So, I just, that's one thing that's always going to be very troubling about this whole thing, is that while that might be political, the backstory is their parents and families are really hurting. They're hurting because they're not getting the right answers they need. They're getting, it's one thing to tell people what they think that they need to hear, but that's just not how grieving is. These are grieving families. 8 months ago, their kids were alive. And I'll tell you, it'll always be fresh in their minds, even in the next couple years. Because when you lose a child, 8 months is not a long time. And I find the insensitivity almost hard to bear. So some people say the media is finally showing up and listening closely to the witness testimony by Mr. Hicks, Gregory Hicks, and I think that's helpful that the media showed up. So that whole Benghazi thing. Now, the thing that I also want to mention on the backstory is that while all this was happening, the former Dr. Gosnell, his the verdict came in, and that was yesterday, Monday. The verdict came in. He was charged with 3 counts of murder in the first degree with the 3 babies. And, of course, anything falling around that whole case, they're waiting. It'll be Monday when they have the final phase, the aggravation phase of that trial. So while that was all happening, this is, again, the backstory. This was all happening, and all this other news was swirling around. So, and again, let's go further with that backstory, okay? And I was telling you, we'd dig a little bit deeper. With that trial and the conclusion to that coming on Monday, the news from Friday, as the AP story broke regarding the 2 months worth of phone calls and phone numbers by AP reporters. I believe there was 20 AP reporters. This was all happening. So you see the headlines, just to get past all the headlines and the Benghazi and then the IRS scandal in itself. The backstory is these are important issues. You figure the abortion trial itself will call into question everything that has happened in the abortion industry altogether, that would question the Planned Parenthood. So you could see there's a diametrical problem here, and it has all kinds of tentacles in itself. And all the while, as we're listening to President Obama yesterday talking about the talking points not even hint on the real part of the issues that were really covered in the whole testimony that happened over in the hearings, that they can place times and dates. Oh, while this is all happening, President Obama is meeting with Prime Minister David Cameron, and they're talking, and then he's talking about how they went to what is that, Ohio, the March Madness last year, and they're hanging out. You know, I just think that tone, and again, let's study a little linguistics on our off time, but linguistics, tone, language, mannerisms, body language, follow that, because that's an interesting part of this whole thing that a lot of people are probably paying attention. It's like you're trying to get, absorb all this news information, and I'd really like to unplug from that too. But it's interesting to absorb some of the other stuff that's happening while we're reading the headlines. And gosh, it's been pretty eventful. So that's some of the stuff that we've been touching on. Some of the other stories that have also been covered is the solar flares. There was a real interesting video on that. Again, it's on the Field Report page at the Facebook. I got a feed that I follow every day. Massive solar flares yesterday, I believe. So that would be Monday, Tuesday, and now today is Wednesday. So yeah, Monday. So there was a massive solar storm, and I'm not sure if it was a solar storm or it was just major solar flares. So it was helpful to learn some things about what solar flares are and what's happening on the surface of the sun. Knowing that the sun is hydrogen and helium, it helps to understand why these explosions happen, knowing the chemical compound. Some other things on the field report, some more news touched on. Interesting topics around all those political topics. Another topic that's kind of just crept along, and it's the sexual abuse happening in the military or sexual assault cases and reports. But they're also saying as that trend has occurred, also the trend of fraudulent reports. So it's an interesting story to follow more. Some other things that I'm trying to touch on, but mainly some of those topics around that, the weather, the space weather, some other things happening in Israel, Saudi Arabia. There was an interesting story that came out, and I just totally just went through one ear and out the other, and I probably should follow up on some stuff that's happening over in the Middle East. Well, anyway, so you follow these. The trend here is the news, and that's the backstory. Just the headlines itself, if we can get past some of the headlines and dig a little deeper, read some of the storylines, know who's writing the stories, and what do you see happening ahead of time? That would be the assignment here that we're going to spend some time on. Is the backstory is the assignment, and what we want to do is go forward and follow up on some of these news stories. Let's watch the trend of this news cycle, because in 2 weeks it is going to be all kinds of different types of news, and some people are predicting and forecasting that the climate, the environment for the news right now is raw. 2 weeks from now it'll kind of dull out and it'll be some other topics. So, but it'll be interesting. Just follow this trend. Know that this trend of news will not take away from what happened in Benghazi. It's not going to take away from all the other scandals. But you'll see that some of this news will subside in the next day or two. The other stories that I think are right now are very raw news stories. So it'll be interesting how those things play out. And are really a full report would be hard to follow along and give anybody a full assessment of this. I certainly think that it's just the news is changing so much, and some are predicting that as this news story about the IRS digging up information on conservative groups is just only going to get bigger from here. So that's an interesting story that is going to continue to, and again, I mentioned this at the Facebook page. It has a lot of tentacles. It's so big, and that backstory, again, it's going to be more beyond the headlines. So we'll follow up more soon here at the Field Report. We want to thank you for stopping by and listening to this audio, and stop over at our Field Report page at Facebook, or follow me at Pinterest. Good night. God bless.